I was plunged into a waking nightmare the day my wife, with a voice both icy and resolute, asked for a divorce and then sent me to speak to her new husband. In that moment, my heart splintered into 1,000 shards, each one reflecting the life we once built together, and now everything lay in ruins. I was thrust into a surreal confrontation with a man I'd never imagined sharing my sorrow with, forced to face the betrayal that rewrote every promise we had made. The invitation to meet him felt like a summons to the execution of my past, a final farewell to the love I thought was eternal. I remember the day vividly, a gray, drizzly morning that seemed to echo the heaviness in my chest. The house was eerily silent when I awoke, as if it too had sensed that something was irrevocably broken. My wife's note lay on the kitchen counter, its neat script almost mocking in its finality. "We're over. Please come meet someone who now holds my heart." I could hardly comprehend those words. My mind raced through memories of laughter, shared dreams, and whispered promises made in the dark of night. How could it all vanish so suddenly, so callously? The decision to honor her request was not one I made lightly. I spent hours pacing the living room, wrestling with disbelief and a simmering storm of anger and despair. Every step I took toward the unknown felt weighted by the echoes of our happier days, days when the future was a shared adventure and love was our guiding light. I couldn't fathom that the man I once thought was my forever partner had chosen to rewrite our story in such a cruel, unexpected manner. Yet, deep down, I knew I had to face this final chapter of our life together, no matter how shattered I felt. I drove to the address listed on the note, a modest townhouse nestled in a quiet, upscale neighborhood that I'd never bothered to visit before. As I parked my car, my hands trembled on the steering wheel, and the world around me blurred into a haze of memories and regret. I stepped out into the damp morning, each droplet of rain feeling like a tear for all that was lost. My heart pounded relentlessly, and the cold wind whispered secrets of change that I wasn't ready to accept. When I reached the door, I hesitated, half expecting to be pulled back into the past. Instead, I found a sleek, modern foyer that contrasted sharply with the warmth I once knew. I rang the doorbell, and after what seemed like an eternity, the door swung open. Standing before me was a man in his mid-30s, dressed sharply in a tailored suit. His eyes, calm and steady, revealed nothing of the emotions swirling within. He extended his hand with a measured smile that did nothing to ease the turbulent storm inside me. "Hello," he said, his voice even and polite. "I'm Richard. Please come in." I followed him into a tastefully decorated living room that seemed more like a showplace than a home. There were no family photographs on the walls, no mementos of shared laughter, only an austere elegance that emphasized the finality of my new reality. I sat down in an armchair that looked too pristine for the heavy mood that lingered in the air. Richard took a seat across from me, his posture relaxed as though this conversation were an everyday occurrence. But for me, every second stretched into an eternity of questions and heartache. Richard began, "I understand this is a difficult time for you, and I want you to know that I don't take any pleasure in this situation. Lisa, your wife, has made her choice and I believe you deserve an explanation." His tone was sincere, devoid of malice, and it almost made me want to believe that there was a rational explanation behind her actions. But deep within, I knew that no rationalization could ease the sting of betrayal. "I don't know what you mean," I managed to say, my voice cracking. She left. And now I'm supposed to sit here and listen to you tell me how everything is okay?" Richard's eyes softened with understanding. "I'm not here to make excuses, nor to defend her choices. I'm simply here to be honest. Lisa has been unhappy for some time now. I'm not saying this to hurt you, but because you deserve the truth. It wasn't just a whim, there were reasons she struggled to communicate." His words hung in the air, heavy with implications. I could feel my stomach twisting into knots as I tried to process the admission. My wife, the woman I had trusted with every secret, had been unhappy? How could I have been so blind? I recalled the late nights when she'd sit quietly in the study, her eyes distant as if haunted by unsaid thoughts. I remembered the small, unexplained silences at the dinner table, the subtle avoidance of discussions about our future. Perhaps these were not signs of a crumbling relationship, but the prelude to a devastating revelation I was too stubborn to see. Now, confronted with the undeniable truth, I felt a mix of anger, sorrow, and a bitter sense of liberation. Knowing the reasons behind her departure, however painful, was a first step toward reclaiming my own identity from the wreckage. Richard continued gently, "Lisa cared for you deeply once. I believe she still does in her own way, but she's found something in me that she felt was missing at home. I'm not trying to replace you, never could, but I have taken on the role she left vacant. I realize this might be hard for you to accept, and I don't expect it to be easy. Every word hit me like a cold wave. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of regrets and what. Part of me longed to scream, to demand that she come back, to explain that love isn't something you can simply exchange for a fleeting promise of happiness. Yet another part of me was strangely relieved by this unexpected clarity. Finally, the vague shadows of doubt and confusion were giving way to something tangible, even if it was painful. The conversation turned to the minutiae of our shared past, the moments of joy and the fractures that had slowly developed over time. Richard's calm narrative forced me to re-examine my own memories, the late-night conversations that had once been our sanctuary, the quiet mornings filled with shared coffee and whispered dreams, and the small, almost imperceptible ways in which we had drifted apart. It was as if I were watching a movie of my life, one in which the protagonist, myself, had been oblivious to the impending tragedy. Every recollection was bittersweet, each memory a reminder of what once was and what could never be again. I found myself asking questions, desperate for any detail that might explain the inexplicable. When did she start feeling this way? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Richard hesitated, then replied, it wasn't a sudden change. Over time, the connection you once had began to fray. I think she felt alone even when she wasn't physically alone. The silence between you grew louder with each passing day, and eventually, it became too much for her to bear. That struck a chord deep within me. I remembered nights when I came home late from work, exhausted and distracted by my own concerns, only to find her sitting in the dark, her eyes filled with longing for something she couldn't articulate. I had dismissed it then as weariness or stress. Now, I realized those were the early signals of a heart quietly breaking. As the conversation unfolded, I began to feel an unexpected transformation. The initial surge of anger, so potent in those first moments of heartbreak, slowly gave way to a reflective calm. I was beginning to see that my wife's departure, as devastating as it was, might also be a catalyst for understanding who I truly was beyond the roles I had been forced into: husband, provider, partner. I realized that in the process of losing her, I might also be shedding parts of myself that had long been defined by our shared identity. Richard's voice grew softer as he continued, I'm not here to judge you or to tell you what you should feel. I only hope that, in time, you can come to understand that this isn't about fault. It's about the inevitable changes we all go through. Sometimes we outgrow the chapters we once cherished. His words, intended as solace, resonated with a painful truth. I had always believed that love was a constant, unchanging force, a rock upon which we built our lives. But now, I was forced to confront the reality that even the strongest foundations can crumble under the weight of unmet needs and unspoken despair. The conversation meandered through the intricate terrain of emotions and memories. I spoke of the small joys we once shared, the sound of her laughter in the kitchen, the warmth of her hand in mine during long winter walks, and I wept as I recalled how those moments had slowly faded into silence. I questioned where we had gone wrong, wondering if there was a moment when I could have done something differently, if I had missed the subtle hints that had signaled the end of our union. Richard listened patiently, his eyes never wavering from mine, as though he understood that I was not merely speaking about a lost marriage, but about a part of myself that I had to reclaim. Hours passed as we sat there, the ticking of the clock marking time in a space where sorrow and reflection intertwined. I began to see that, despite the sting of betrayal and the raw wound of abandonment, there was an unexpected clarity emerging from the darkness. In the quiet aftermath of that painful conversation, I realized that my wife's decision was not entirely a reflection of my inadequacies, but rather a complex interplay of circumstances, unmet expectations, and the inescapable evolution of two individuals who had once been inseparable. I thanked Richard for his candor, though my voice trembled with unresolved emotions. As I stood to leave, I felt the weight of the moment settle over me, a heavy, bittersweet burden that signified both an end and the tentative beginnings of something new. I walked out of that elegant townhouse feeling exposed yet strangely liberated, as if I had been stripped of a facade that no longer served me. The rain had stopped, and the sky, though overcast, hinted at the possibility of a clearing. I knew that the road ahead would be arduous, filled with introspection, healing, and the long journey toward self-discovery. Driving back through the quiet streets, I let the memories wash over me like the gentle hum of the tires on the wet pavement. I replayed every word of our conversation, every painful confession, and every fleeting moment of understanding. I realized that while the end of our marriage was irrevocable, it did not have to define the rest of my life. I could, perhaps, rebuild from the ruins, learning from my mistakes, forgiving myself for the times I had been inattentive, and rediscovering the man I once was before the weight of our shared past had consumed me. That night, I sat alone in my study, the soft glow of a desk lamp illuminating scattered papers and old photographs. I picked up a pen and began to write, not a letter to my lost love, but a confession to my own soul. I wrote about the moments of joy and sorrow, the times I had taken for granted the delicate beauty of our shared life, and the painful realization that sometimes love transforms into something unrecognizable. With each word, I felt the burden on my heart lighten, as if the act of writing was a silent promise to myself, that I would emerge from this darkness stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. In that solitary moment, I understood that the path to healing was not a linear journey but a mosaic of setbacks and triumphs, a delicate balance between holding on to the past and embracing the uncertainty of the future. I resolved to honor the lessons of our shared years while venturing into the unknown, determined to find meaning in the aftermath of loss. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of hope, I closed my journal and looked out the window at a world reborn each day. I knew that my wife's decision, and the painful meeting with her new husband, would always be a part of my story. Yet I also recognized that every ending is the fertile ground for a new beginning. The man I would become was waiting to be discovered in the spaces between the heartbreak and the healing. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool morning air fill my lungs, and stepped outside with cautious resolve. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of possibility, a spark of hope that whispered even amidst sorrow, there was a future waiting to be written. And so, I began to walk forward, each step a quiet testament to resilience, each breath a promise to honor the past without being defined by it. The drive home was long and winding, the rain now a gentle drizzle that blurred the neon lights of the city into watercolor reflections. Every red light, every empty stretch of road, echoed with the remnants of that conversation with Richard. I replayed his words over and over, the calm explanations of a crumbling love, the quiet confession that our connection had frayed long before I ever truly noticed. The weight of his honesty pressed against me, both an unbearable sorrow and, paradoxically, a strange relief. In that moment, I realized that facing the truth, however bitter, was the only path left forward. Back in the solitude of my home, I found myself surrounded by memories, the faded photographs of happier times, the handwritten letters tucked away in a drawer, and the silent echoes of laughter that once filled these rooms. Each object was a fragment of a life that had ended abruptly, leaving behind an emptiness that seemed to stretch into infinity. For days, I wandered through this ghostly museum of our past, unable to escape the sensation that I was living in a world that no longer belonged to me. I questioned every smile, every shared secret, and every moment of silence that I had once dismissed as trivial. Yet, amid the wreckage, a quiet ember of determination began to glow. I knew that I had two choices, to allow the betrayal and heartbreak to define me, or to forge a new path out of the rubble. In the dead of night, I sat at my desk, the glow of a solitary lamp casting long shadows across scattered papers and old notebooks. I picked up a pen and began to write, not letters of despair or regret, but a raw, honest confession of my own transformation. I wrote about the anger that had once consumed me, the moments of bitter self-recrimination, and the slow dawning of clarity that came with accepting that I was more than the sum of my past mistakes. With every word, I began to feel the first stirrings of renewal. I recalled the times when I used to take pleasure in small moments, a walk in the park, a spontaneous conversation with a stranger, the quiet satisfaction of a meal well cooked. I realized that I had neglected these simple joys, buried them beneath the heavy layers of obligation and routine that once defined our shared life. In my solitude, I rediscovered parts of myself that had long lain dormant. My passion for photography, my love for old jazz records that filled the living room with soulful melodies, and even the thrill of learning something new. I resolved to reclaim these fragments of my identity, piece by piece, until the person I once was could emerge again from the ashes. One morning, as dawn broke with soft hues of gold and pink, I made a decision that would mark the beginning of my personal renaissance. I stepped outside into the cool, crisp air and took a long, deliberate walk through the neighborhood park. The trees, their leaves rustling in the gentle breeze, whispered secrets of resilience and growth. I let the serenity of nature wash over me, each step a silent promise to myself that I would not be defined by loss. The park bench where I once sat with Lisa during countless quiet afternoons now felt like an altar to new beginnings. I sat down, closed my eyes, and allowed myself to simply breathe in the beauty of that moment, a moment unburdened by the ghosts of yesterday. As the days turned into weeks, I immersed myself in small acts of self-care. I reconnected with old friends who had long tried to reach out, their voices filled with genuine concern and the promise of unconditional support. I joined a local photography club, rediscovering the joy of capturing fleeting moments on film, of framing the world in a way that honored its impermanence. Every shutter click became a meditation, a reminder that beauty exists even in the midst of decay. I started volunteering at a community center on weekends, sharing my own story with others who had been scarred by the unpredictability of love. Their tears and laughter, their whispered thanks and hopeful smiles, reminded me that healing was not a solitary journey but one that was shared by countless souls. One particular afternoon, while out on a photography assignment in a part of the city I'd never explored before, I met an elderly man sitting on a crumbling stoop, his eyes twinkling with mischief despite the hardship etched into every line of his face. He introduced himself as Harold, and over the course of a long conversation, he shared with me his own tale of love lost, of dreams dashed, and of the slow, painful process of finding beauty in life's brokenness. "Son," he said, his voice gravelly but warm, "life has a way of breaking us, of scattering us to the winds. But every piece, every shard of what we once were has a place. It's up to you to gather them up and build something new." His words struck a deep chord in me, and in that moment, I felt a profound connection. A shared understanding that, despite the jagged fractures of our past, we were both capable of becoming whole again. In the weeks that followed, I began to see subtle changes in myself. The anger that had once burned like wildfire began to settle into a quiet ember that fueled my determination rather than my despair. I started to reflect on the lessons hidden within every painful memory. I remembered the nights when Lisa would quietly cry herself to sleep, the times when her smile faded into a mask of silent sorrow. I wondered if perhaps she too had been a victim of her own unmet desires, of dreams that had gone unfulfilled. That line of thought did not excuse her actions, but it softened the hard edges of my resentment, allowing me to see her as a flawed, complex human being, one who had made choices that I was now forced to understand from a distance. I also began to explore the art of forgiveness, not as an act of condoning the past, but as a way to liberate myself from its suffocating grip. I attended therapy sessions where I learned that forgiveness was not about erasing memories or diminishing the pain, but about reclaiming the parts of myself that had been lost in the storm. I realized that holding on to anger was like carrying a heavy boulder that slowed my every step, while letting go of that bitterness allowed me to move forward with a lighter heart. It was a gradual process, one marked by setbacks and small victories, but each step brought me closer to a state of acceptance and inner peace. One evening, as I sat in my favorite armchair by the window, a cup of chamomile tea steaming gently in my hands, I reflected on how far I had come. The room, once filled with echoes of our shared past, now resonated with the soft music of a future that I was slowly beginning to envision. I opened an old journal and read through entries filled with dreams and aspirations that had been shelved when life became too overwhelming. I wrote new entries that spoke of hope, of plans to travel, of aspirations to start a small project that combined my love for photography with my newfound passion for community work. In those quiet moments, I felt a surge of gratitude for the painful journey that had led me to rediscover myself. A journey that, despite its twists and heartaches, had taught me the strength of vulnerability and the beauty of resilience. The turning point came on a sunny afternoon in early summer, when I decided to take a short trip to the countryside, a place far removed from the chaos of my former life. I rented a small cottage near a lake, a serene retreat where time seemed to slow, and the burdens of the past melted away into the gentle lapping of water against the shore. In that peaceful solitude, I spent long hours wandering the meadows, capturing the golden light through my camera lens, and simply allowing myself to exist without the weight of regret. I wrote letters to my future self, promising that I would never forget the lessons learned in the darkest hours, and that I would always seek beauty in the everyday moments. One particularly memorable day, while sitting by the lakeside at sunset, I encountered a young woman who was sketching the tranquil scene before her. We struck up a conversation, and she confided that she, too, had experienced a painful breakup that left her questioning the very essence of love. There, by the fading light, we shared our stories, the shattered fragments of broken relationships, the desperate hope that had kept us going, and the ultimate realization that every ending was a doorway to a new beginning. Her eyes, filled with both sorrow and determination, reminded me that even in the midst of loss, there was a resilience that could be nurtured, a spark that could reignite the passion for living. Returning home from that trip, I felt transformed, not because the pain had vanished but because I had learned to live with it in a way that empowered me rather than enslaved me. I resumed my daily routines with a renewed sense of purpose. I continued my volunteer work, joined local community events, and even began mentoring others who found themselves adrift after love had turned bitter. I was slowly piecing together a mosaic of a new life, one that was not defined by the betrayal I had endured, but by the growth that had emerged from it. Every so often, I would still catch a glimpse of Lisa in passing, a familiar face in a crowded room, a fleeting smile that held no recognition. In those moments, I no longer felt the sting of envy or bitterness. Instead, I found myself silently wishing her well, hoping that she, too, would find the peace and fulfillment that had eluded us both. I realized that our paths had diverged long ago, and that the person I was becoming was far more important than the person I had once been. One evening, as autumn began to paint the leaves in fiery hues of red and gold, I sat down with a cup of warm cider on my back porch. The crisp air carried with it a sense of change, a reminder that every season had its own beauty, even as it signaled the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. I reflected on the journey I had undertaken, the meeting with Richard that had shattered my world, the long nights of introspection and tears, and the gradual, sometimes agonizing process of rebuilding my identity. In that quiet moment of solitude, I felt a profound gratitude for the resilience that had blossomed from the ruins of my shattered past. I realized that true strength was not measured by the absence of pain, but by the willingness to face it, to learn from it, and to emerge on the other side with a heart that was more open and compassionate. I had come to understand that while the scars of betrayal would always be a part of me, they no longer defined me. Instead, they served as poignant reminders of a journey that had taught me the imperishable value of self-love and the transformative power of forgiveness. In time, I began to look forward with genuine anticipation. I made plans to travel to places I had always dreamed of visiting, to immerse myself in cultures that celebrated life in all its diversity. I even started a small blog chronicling my journey of healing and self-discovery, a digital testament to the fact that every heartbreak holds within it the seeds of renewal. My words, once filled with despair, now carried the gentle cadence of hope, resonating with others who had found themselves lost in the aftermath of shattered dreams. Standing at the precipice of a new life, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the twists and turns that had led me here. My wife's decision to leave and the painful encounter with her new husband had forced me to confront parts of myself that I had long ignored. The raw honesty of that moment, though devastating at the time, had become the catalyst for a transformation that I now embraced wholeheartedly. I was not the man defined by betrayal and loss. I was a man reborn through the fires of hardship, ready to embrace a future filled with possibility and meaning. As the days grew longer and the chill of winter gave way to the promise of spring, I felt a lightness in my step, a gentle liberation from the chains of my past. The journey had not been easy, and there were still moments when the echoes of heartbreak would whisper in the quiet hours of the night. But now, armed with the knowledge that every ending is simply the beginning of a new story, I walked forward with my head held high, eager to see what adventures lay ahead. Tonight, as I sit by the window watching the stars emerge one by one in the velvet sky, I feel an enduring connection to the life I once knew and the life I am yet to create. The scars remain, delicate and luminous in the moonlight, a permanent reminder that I have survived even the deepest betrayals. And as I close my eyes, a serene smile graces my lips, a quiet promise to myself that no matter what comes, I will continue to write my own story, one filled with courage, hope, and the unyielding belief that even after the darkest nights, the dawn will always come. This is the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, a testament to the fact that while the past may be filled with pain and shattered promises, the future holds infinite possibilities for renewal, growth, and love reborn.